the vocab words that we pull out of each of our major projects and units are going to kind of resurface throughout the semester, not only in other projects, but then also in the final project. So as you guys know from Art 1, when we get to the final project, you're going to have to pull from different concepts and techniques and terms and skills that you want to then incorporate kind of comprehensively into your final project, okay? And what we started doing last semester is writing down all these terms as we go, so that not only can we review them, maybe have some quizzes at some point, but then also we have a more firm kind of menu of words to pick from, kind of like a big word bank that's a semester long, so that when we get to the final project, you can go back and use this as a resource to kind of seed your final project, okay? So, from our Mandala unit, these are the words we picked out. And what did you come up with an explanation for symmetry?
Same or like equal throughout.
Mm-hmm. So, symmetry would be same, could be on both sides. If we're thinking like side-by-side symmetry or like mirror image symmetry, right? It could be the same all the way around if we're talking about radial symmetry, as in mandalas. So when we go through the vocab, we have to not only think of the terms in the context of that project, right, like our mandalas, but then also we want to take it a little bit broader and kind of generalize it too, because these terms are not specific to mandalas. They also apply to other concepts. We're going to use them again on the final, okay? So symmetry, we usually refer to the same on both sides, okay? Or if it's radial symmetry, it could be all the way around. There are also different types of symmetry. There's pure symmetry, where it's like a perfect match, right? Like total mirror image. There's approximate symmetry, where it kind of feels symmetrical and it feels like it matches, but it's probably not exactly the same. And then if we branch out even further from that, we think of the word balance, where things feel like things are evenly distributed. And when I say things, I mean like the visual weight, right? Those visual elements in your composition, right? And things can feel balanced and kind of evenly distributed without having to also be symmetrical. So there's kind of a scale of how balanced do you want to be? Do you want to be so balanced that it's symmetrical, or are you going to balance through visual weight and have it be asymmetrically balanced? Does that make sense? Okay, so this opposite of symmetry would also be asymmetry. Don't forget about that. Good. Radial design. What do we have for that?
It was like, it's sort of similar to symmetry, but it starts from like a beginning, like in the mandalas, like most of the people that did mandalas was a circle, and then it goes throughout, so the more bigger, like more.
Exactly. So there's a lot of these hand motions, right? So radial symmetry relates to what shape?
Circle.
Thank you. It relates to a circle. Good. So we're going to call this circular composition. Okay? Now notice that I said radial design. Okay? I could have said radial symmetry, and if I said radial symmetry, then that would have meant like it has to be the same all the way around, right? When we have a circle, the radius is, if you think about your geometry, from the center of the circle to the outside, the perimeter, right? So when you have radial symmetry, it's symmetrical, meaning it's matching all the way around in a circle, okay? Radial design doesn't have to be symmetrical. It just means that you're designing in a circle, okay? And that's where that word composition came up. So what does the word composition mean in terms of art? When we're talking about the composition of an artwork, what are we talking about?
The order of it?
Kind of.
Like everything together.
Kind of. You're all like dancing around it, right? So the composition is how things are laid out on the page. So the placement, the layout, right? How did I phrase it in the last class? How and where design elements are placed on the page. How, where design elements. What are design elements?
interactive and stuff.
Sorta.
Yeah.
Think more generally. Design elements are the stuff in your artwork,
Yeah.
right? The lines, the shapes, the colors, the textures, the values, all the stuff that you're designing, right? So where you're placing things on the page, we could also call this layout. Okay, placement, that's your important word there. So when we talk about an artwork, much of what we are commenting on is often the composition. Okay,
Did you
it's
say-
just a nice way of saying that. Go
Would
ahead.
you say composition is like the most important part of the artwork?
Not necessarily, but it is significant.
Right.
Yep,
Plays a role.
definitely, a big one. Yeah, it's a lead role, to put it in theatrical
So if
terms.
you have bad composition, does that automatically make the art bad?
That's a really good question. If you have bad composition, does it automatically make the artwork bad? I'm gonna say I'm sure there are cases that we could argue where it doesn't,
Yeah.
but in terms of what we think of at this level of our art development, like as students developing, I would say we always wanna strive for good composition, and that's primarily often what we are really aiming for, is our composition and our design skills. That was a really good question. Way to go. All right, so does radial design make sense? Okay, so you can have a circular composition, okay, now that is not symmetrical, but it is radial design because it's based on a circle. Make sense? It's a real simple one, but you get the idea? All right, we're gonna move on. Symbolism.
A design or shape that stands or means something.
Yes. So a design or shape that stands for, okay, we could also say refers to a particular meaning. Okay, so let's macrocosm, microcosm this. Okay, in the context of our mandala, we often used like little icon symbols, right? They were kind of small, they were very simple shapes, right? And they had meanings that we were symbolizing within our journey, within the scope of that timeline, right? In other artworks, so like not necessarily mandalas, the idea of symbolism does not have to be as specific or as kind of narrowed down as it was in mandalas, right? So in any artwork, in any composition, we could have even just one symbol or one thing, one design element in our work that refers to something or is supposed to make the viewers think of something, right? Movie directors do this all the time. Things like Easter eggs, things like little tiny references, right? So anything could be a symbol for anything else, but the idea of symbolism is what gives meaning through that idea of referencing another idea, right, in your artwork. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
Questions?
I
Good.
don't have any.
What is a narrative?
We said it's like a story that someone shares with a lot of people.
So narrative is the idea of telling a story. Okay, how did I phrase it in this class? Art that tells a story. Telling a story through art, in this case. Okay? The other thing that we want to think about with the concept or the idea of a narrative is timeline. And that's kind of how we saw it in our mandalas, right? So for most of us, we designed either from the center out or from the outward edges in, and that was that progression through a particular timeline, through a particular journey. With non-mandala art, taking this broader scale, we're just telling a story. It doesn't have to be in a circle, it doesn't have to be in a linear fashion, but we can use that idea of a narrative or that storytelling element. And that, you can see how that would relate back with symbolism as well, right? We're suggesting other ideas with our artwork, okay? Questions on narrative? We're good? Good. All right. Cultural inspiration.
We thought it was like kind of like a community like inspired artwork where it's kind of passed down through the history of your family.
You got a lot of elements in there. You got family history, you got community, you got the idea of passing down messages. The other class said it is referring to ideas and techniques used by other cultures. Okay? So we're going to kind of make it really broad. So referring to ideas or techniques. You could also say symbols that are used by other cultures.
So would that be like appropriating their culture, like stealing it, or would it be?
That is a form of cultural inspiration, right? So if we take too much from another culture, and I'm going to use your Spider-Man example because that's something that was on your mind today. Not that Spider-Man is cultural necessarily, but when we take too much from another culture or from another source, right, and we use it for our own purposes, if we don't truly understand by being part of that culture what that significance might be or what the meanings might be, we walk a very fine line that we could be disrespectful or we could be sending messages maybe that we don't mean. And there are, by definition, there's a lot about other cultures that we just don't know because we're not part of that culture, right? So when we think about using inspiration from other cultures, we want to be particularly sensitive to the idea that other cultures put a lot of meaning and symbolism into the different aspects of their cultures. And oftentimes we can't fully encompass or understand that without being part of that culture or without some really significant education about that. And so that should kind of trigger not a red flag, but a signal in your brain that reminds you to be sensitive, be respectful, be extra careful when using cultural influences. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, cultural appropriation is when we do that to a negative extent. When we use cultural influence in ways that are disrespectful or ways that are uneducated. And it's a slippery slope because there's no way that we can know everything about every culture, even if we're really well educated, right? There's limits on what we can do as humans. So, does all this make sense? Okay, we're going to add more to this as we go through. So save this page if you need to flag it or mark it in some way. Okay, for the rest of today, I have a guided brainstorm for us to do. So flip to a new page in your sketchbook.